Please start, sir.
Am I audible, sir? Lingam sir.
Yeah, you are very much audible, sir. Please start.
Sir, am I audible? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you are audible, sir. Please start.
Yeah, okay, I'll start, sir. ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಭಿಕರಿಗೂ ಶನಿವಾರದ ಶುಭಾಶಯಗಳು. Good morning, respected professors, colleagues, and co-participants. I extend a warm welcome to all of you for today's webinar series on Atmanirbhar Bharat, Opportunities and Challenges, organized by Central University of Karnataka, Department of Economic Studies and Planning, in association with Bharatiya Vitta Sahakara Samiti BVSS Bangalore. Today we have with us two eminent speakers, Professor S.K. Loraya and C.A. Naval Kishore Bajaj. And to grace the session, we have guest of honors, Professor M.V. Alagawadi, Professor Pushpa M. Savadatti, I, moderator Dr. Pandurangavi. On behalf of organizing secretaries Lingamurthy and Dr. Baswaraj, I welcome all of you for today's session. I wish to give a brief introduction of the eminent speakers of today's session. We have with us today a senior professor, Professor S.K. Loraya. Professor S.K. Loraya is working as professor in the Department of Economics, Hansraj College, University of Delhi. He is serving there for more than 4 decades. He is privileged to be a student of Nobel laureate Professor Amartya Sen and Dr. Manmohan Singh, our former PM. He has been a member of WTO and Economic Affairs Committees of ASSOCHAM. Professor Loraya is associated with the School of Management, Paris, as adjunct professor. Professor Loraya is advisor and professor in the area of economics and research methodology at Amity Business School, Amity University, Noida, Uttar Pradesh. He is also associated with number of prestigious business schools as visiting faculty. Professor Loraya is having a vast experience. He is working as marketing research consultant to a reputed cement company, JK Lakshmi Private Limited. JK Lakshmi Cement Private Limited. He has undertaken a project on measuring employees' satisfaction for Dubai Electricity and Water Authority, DEWA, in Dubai. He has been conducting MDPs in the areas of business environment, trade policy, WTO, in the developing world, managerial economics, customer relations management, and marketing research for managers at the senior level in both private sector as well as public sector companies like Indian Airlines, Telecommunications Consultants of India, BSNL, National Thermal Power Corporation, Onida, JK Lakshmi Cement, SAIL, Indian Airlines, etc. He has extensively traveled abroad, various countries, and academic and other assignments. Sir Loraya sir will welcome you on behalf of all the participants as well as on behalf of organizing secretaries. A warm welcome to you, Loraya sir. And I will also introduce another speaker of the day. Another speaker of the day is C.A. Naval Kishore Bajaj. C.A. Naval Kishore Bajaj is a chartered accountant. Bajaj is a chartered accountant, certified internal auditor, certified information systems auditor, and forensic accounting. C.A. Kishore is currently working as Chief Audit Executive and Enterprise Risk Manager of Japanese MNC in Bangalore. C.A. Bajaj is a member of Expert Study Group of Internal Audit Standards Board of ICAI, Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He is a member of Executive Board of Bharatiya Vitta Sahakara Samiti, BVSS, Delhi. C.A. Naval Kishore is a Joint Technical Director in Course Committee of the International Business Valuers Association. C.A. Naval Kishore has been participating as guest speaker on economic policies and corporate governance in various reputed organizations such as Central University of Karnataka, BVSS Delhi, and several other organizations like Indian Management Association, Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, Institute of Internal Auditors, the Institute of Corporate Affairs, PhD, Chamber of Commerce, etc. And he has done a lot of social work also. C.A. Naval Kishore has worked as the rights of home buyers in Noida. He supports promotion of Hindu culture and values by association with various reputed organizations. We welcome you, sir. I welcome both the speakers of the session. I also welcome guest of honor of today's session, Professor M.V. Saudati, Professor and Head Department of Economic Studies and Planning, Central University of Karnataka. I extend a warm welcome to Professor M.V. Lagawadi, sir, Head Department of Business Studies and the Dean School of Business Studies, Central University of Karnataka. I extend a warm welcome to all the participants on behalf of organizing secretaries. I hand over the session for further proceedings to Professor Pushpa, Madam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Patti, for welcoming our today's eminent guests and introducing them to the august audience. I myself, Professor Pushpa Saudati, Head of the Department of Economic Studies and Planning, School of Business Studies, Central University of Karnataka, extend a very warm welcome to both the eminent Professor S.K. Lauria and Shri
I give over
Bajaj.
the session to Professor Pushpa, Madam, for proceedings.
Am I audible?
Over to Professor Pushpa, Madam.
Am I audible? Am I
Yes,
audible?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, madam.
Yeah.
I extend a warm welcome on my behalf and on behalf of Department of Economics, Central University of Karnataka. At the outset, I thank BVSS Sangha for collaborating with us in organizing this special webinar on Atmanirbhar Bharat opportunities and challenges. This is very interesting webinar session, basically more useful for our students. So given the Prime Minister has given the call Atmanirbhar Bharat, and in the scenario of changing geopolitical geopolitics between different economic powers, this becomes all the more important. What do we mean by Atmanirbhar Bharat, and what are the opportunities and challenges it is throwing at students? So I once again thank you, and without taking much time, I extend warm welcome to all our faculties from Central University of Karnataka and from different parts of the country and other universities, and my dear students. And now I will hand over the floor to Dr. Patti for further. And I think I will request the speakers to speak on their lecture. Thank you. Hand over to Patti. Dr. Patti.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you very much. Now I request Professor S.K. Lauria to start his presentation. Professor S.K. Lauria, most welcome. You are ready to hear.
And good morning, everybody, all the participants and respect. It's indeed a privilege to be with you today. Let's see my dear friend Naval Bajaj. And I'll just be speaking to you on Atmanirbhar Bharat, some issues, challenges and opportunities. Let me tell you on the outset, I'm not here to provide solutions. I'm just going to raise some issues in academic connotations, and will be willing to answer all the questions if they as they come across. My discussion will be in three parts. One would be, why do we need Atmanirbhar Bharat? What prompted the present dispensation to do that? And then how do we interpret Atmanirbhar Bharat? There's a different interpretations, but we in academics, we have to take a very logical and relevant analytical interpretation. And then from a very holistic point of view, we have to look at what challenges and opportunities are. In the nutshell, we have to just weigh whether challenges are more than opportunities or vice versa. And then look at what scenario is in front of us for the next 5 years. I limit my discussion to about 30 minutes, 25 minutes, time permitted by the organizers. See, what is Atmanirbhar Bharat? If I put it in 3 words, it's a vibrant, dynamic, and outward-looking India in the community of the nations. For the last 5 or 6 years, we have seen how India has been given a status in the community of nations by UNO, by Americans, other countries. So what has happened is, suddenly we find there is a change in the whole scenario. And that's why the need for Atmanirbhar Bharat has increased further. And that's why our dear Prime Minister has said that we have to go for Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India. I just list 4 or 5 reasons in this direction, then continue with that. One is the COVID, this pandemic. It has kept everybody on tenterhooks, as you know. I need not put across to you as to why it has some tenterhooks, but disturbed the whole equilibrium of the economy. And we find that all the economies in the world are down in terms of their GDP, their basic economic indicators. But even in these times, in the month of March, we were not producing even a single PPE, personal protection equipment. Today, we are producing lakhs of them in a month and exporting also. Same is true of ventilators. Had these not been done, perhaps we would have depended on supplies from China or other countries. This is Atmanirbharta. Then there's a changing economic scenario in the world today. Trade wars likely looming very large between China and America, having impact on the world. Then there's a Chinese expansionism is also happening. And you have seen recently how Chinese have tried to grab our land in Galwan Valley and other parts of eastern Ladakh, and still they're adamant. And geopolitical situation, as Dr. Sabadrati has mentioned, has also changed. And then we have to change in terms of our foreign policy. A few days back, if some of you remember, our foreign minister, external ministers, Mr. Jaishankar said, we have to shed the caution, traditional caution that we had, and we have to believe more in our self-respect and self-interest rather than multilateralism. So all these are triggering a phenomena. Unless India is strong and capable, it cannot exert pressure on other countries to respect us and follow our national interests. For that, we have to be Atmanirbhar. I think in this scenario, without elaborating much on this, we need some kind of a self-reliance as such. And certainly it's not a self-reliance of pre-90s as such, but self-reliance of a India which can supply to the nations of the world, which can integrate with the global economy, and not going by merely import substitution. But this is what I mean by Atmanirbhar Bharat. Let me go to the second question now. What exactly is interpretation of Atmanirbhar Bharat? Though there are political as well as economic connotations, I try to confine myself to economic connotations only because we teach or study economics alone. Though economics and politics are interwoven into each other, sometimes they need to be elaborated. I'll try to do that. There's one article which appeared yesterday in Times of India, which my dear colleagues you must have read. Former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Panigrahi. He has warned that if we simply go towards Atmanirbharta or self-reliance in terms of pre-91 era, we are doomed to be failure. What we need to do is integrate more and more with world economy, produce more and more for exports, allow more and more FDI, etc., and not import substitution industrialization. Some of you may be teaching to your students or students may be remembering 2 kinds of trade strategies are there. One is called inward oriented trade strategies and one is called outward oriented trade strategies. Atmanirbharta does not mean inward oriented trade strategies. It means outward oriented trade strategies. When we say outward oriented trade strategies, we need to look at how we can strengthen our supply chain, how can strengthen our scale of output, how can it strengthen our credit line, etc., etc. So this question is not self-reliance in an older sense, but a new vibrant economy sense, you see. Now, there's another statement made by Gary Rice a few days back. He's a spokesperson of Indian International Monetary Fund. He said India needs more and more reforms. In spite of the fact that we have moved in a confidence index of doing business, ease of doing business from somewhere 105 to 63 now, it's fairly good. But still we need to do more. And in that context, I must point out to you one figure which some of you may be remembering has been culled out of a data of the Ministry of Trade, that we in India started 6 years back, I mean 2014, 13, 14, some kind of a import substitution in software. Result was very dismal. And the result was we increased our exports from $7.6 billion to $8.9 billion. But we increased our imports from $32 billion to $55.6 billion. Now, if this is the kind of a import substitution strategies towards Atmanirbhar Bharat, perhaps it's bound to be failure, you see. And what is needed is not import substitution induced industrialization, but export induced industrialization. I'll give you one more example to you. If you try to give more tariff protection to the industries, small sector emerges and they make quick profit, risk-free profit, and they never increase the scale of output. So what we need to do is for Atmanirbhar Bharat, invest more and more money, investment into export-oriented industries. This is the second aspect of Atmanirbhar Bharat appropriate interpretation. Third issue, which I think very important, we need to factor in or exploit forward and backward linkages in our economic growth. If we are able to do that, only then will we become Atmanirbhar or self-reliant. Backward linkages and forward linkages in terms of, some of you may remember, very famous Nobel laureate Beasley-Leontief's input-output models. And if we integrate our backward linkages with forward linkages or vice versa, we're definitely going to become more self-reliant, more vibrant, more export-oriented. And fourthly, friends, our economy has to be driven by our self-interest, which we call Swarth. This is another aspect of Atmanirbhar Bharat. When we say it is driven by our Swarth, we must try to see to it our interest comes first and other countries' interest comes later on. Till now, we have been believing more and more on multilateralism. Some of you may recall the era of non-alignment. We never used to take any risk for our interests. If we do not take risk for our interests and maintain and manage our interests, we are not going to be respected in the community of nations. So, this is the fourth aspect of Atmanirbhar Bharat. So, if you look at these four aspects, this appropriately, in my view, define the interpretation of Atmanirbhar Bharat, not primarily economic alone, but also politics as well as foreign policy. Let me now just go to next issue. What are the opportunities we have? I think we have to take a positive approach, both in challenges to meet and opportunity to exploit. My dear colleague and friend Naval will explain you in more details some of the issues which I'm not that competent, but certainly I'll put it out to you, some of the more very significant issues and opportunities. One is the global supply chain management. You see, due to the Chinese and American trade disputes and Chinese so-called dominant strategies to deal with other countries of the world by way of financial muscle, there is a disruption in global supply chain. Many companies want to shift from China to other countries. This is a very big opportunity for us. And you might have noticed recently, Foxconn, a company which is already there in India, is going to invest a huge money, close to about $5 billion, in manufacturing advanced versions of Apple iPhones. And Apple is also going to shift some of its more production from China to India. Second example, Geo platform has attracted huge investment, and Google is going to invest around $3.3 billion in next 2 or 3 years. And Sundar Pichai has recently offered $10 billion to Indian economy over the next 10 years. And a company called Aramco has invested heavily in Reliance, and so is Facebook. So we sense an opportunity here where if we are able to provide some kind of infrastructure, skill sets, and right environment, we can attract this disruption to our advantage. If we are able to do that, this is a big opportunity for Atmanirbhar Bharat. And here, Atmanirbhar Bharat doesn't mean that simply we have to buy local goods, but locally produced goods. When we say locally produced goods, it means the goods which are manufactured either by foreign companies operating in India or Indian companies. So Atmanirbhar does not mean we buy only Indian. But if we make in India, that's a more important issue as such. Similarly, there is a huge opportunity in APIs, active pharma ingredients. Active pharma ingredients are nothing but the bulk drugs which are used for making various kinds of drugs and pharmaceuticals. We are heavily dependent on China. There's a company called Torrent, Zydus Cadila, Ranbaxy. Name the company, they all import their APIs from China. Why not we have some kind of a very robust production and manufacturing base in India for APIs? And if we are able to do that, which Government of India is trying recently, then I think there will be more move towards more and more for Atmanirbharta or self-reliance. This self-reliance doesn't mean that we should produce at a higher cost. If the increase in scale is allowed or being achieved by the companies by heavy investment, both foreign and Indian companies, definitely this is a big opportunity. Third opportunity in my view is on high-end software. So far, what we are exporting is a low-end software, not high-end software. There is no dearth of Indian talent abroad. Silicon Valley is full of Indians. Why not we tap the development of high-end software? This is more value-oriented, revenue-oriented, rather than the quantum-oriented. Then another option is opportunity exists in defense production. For the last 5 years, we have been talking about more and more defense production and exports and inviting foreign investment, but nothing much has happened. This is the right time. We should exploit these opportunities. One of the major issues in defense production increase is it creates a lot of externalities, and many technologies which are developed to develop the products for defense production can be passed on to industry for domestic use, non-defense use. World over it has happened. It can happen in India also. If that happens, there will be a good interface between defense production and production of non-defense goods. I think this is a very big area of opportunity for us. Then come to telecom. Telecom is another area, friends. We have been buying cheap telecom equipment from other countries, including China. Why not we develop or R&D, etc. And recently you heard Mukesh Ambani in his speech online AGM that his company Reliance Jio is developing 5G solutions specifically made for India and for export. This is a very encouraging development, and if it gets through, which I'm sure it will get through, is going to have very big spillover effect all over India, and we can compete with world's best, Huawei and other companies per se. Another opportunity exists in startups. India is a hub of startups. Naval will speak more on that, since I am not that, I told you, competent to do that. But certainly this is a big area. How to do that? Why do we do it? For how long we do it? I think this more and more startups can lead to generation of skill sets, processes, technologies, etc. at a low cost. And let me come to the next issue also, that is the issue of education. As we all are educators, spend our lifetime in education, there are skill sets in India available. Education strategies and facilities are available. Why not we put more investment to education? I was talking to a few friends yesterday, and one consensus which emerges that why not corporate sector is allowed to come in the education sector. Wherever corporate sector has been allowed to come in the education sector has excelled. Typically, if any student of yours or mine want to go for MBA to US or other countries, he has to shell out around 95 to 1 crore of rupees. Why not we provide such facilities here? And if we do that, we are not only helping the people to save money, but also creating a right and relevant skill sets, which has a very beneficial impact on the production and other facilities in this country. So friends, this is another opportunity. Then there is another opportunity in healthcare, you see. Invest heavily into healthcare. India is a destination to a large number of countries from the Middle East and Africa and Asian countries, because we are comparatively cheaper in terms of offering health services. Why not we exploit this area? But for doing all this, you need to create more infrastructure, give more freedom to the health investors, as well as reduce controls and regulations. So friends, I think these are the opportunities in my view which are available, can be harnessed by the country, government, entrepreneurs. It will definitely take us towards more and more towards the Atmanirbhar Bharat. There are many more which I am not saying at the moment for the sake of brevity of time. Let me now look at the challenges. Saying opportunities are there definitely doesn't mean that challenges are not there. And in my view, challenges are much more daunting than the opportunities. One of the biggest challenges for exploiting opportunities, which I just mentioned to you, is the absence of a robust, vibrant banking system in this country. Naval will speak more on to you with data, but let me tell you, we find a large increase in NPAs, non-performing assets of banks. In order to curb those NPAs, you make more and more rules where credit expansion becomes a casualty. The moment credit expansion becomes a casualty, there is a dryness in the flow of funds from banks to the customers. And since PSUs are largest banks, they are very, very cautious in terms of lending. That's why credit offtake for last 1 year is very dismal. So unless credit is available, that too at beneficial terms, easily available to the entrepreneurs, merely having opportunities will not be exploited unless such investments or funds are available. Second, the more important issue is a legal and justice system. We have so many controls, so many regulations, archaic laws, and if any entrepreneur unfortunately has legal issue, the very, very slow system of legal justice in this country. This needs to be improved. How to be improved? I am not expert. I am sure the discussion may follow my interaction and Nawal's interaction will throw some light on how to improve on this. I just give you one example. In Supreme Court, recently I had a chance to visit in connection with some case. The case is lying for last 3 years, and it is the only interpretation of one paragraph of an office memorandum of Department of Personnel and Training of central government. And already there's a judgment, 2 judgments given by Delhi High Court. One is a single bench and one is a double bench. Both have upheld the case. The Government of India went into the appeal through SLP, specially petitioned Supreme Court. It is lying in Supreme Court for 3 years. If an ordinary citizen has to face these problems, you can very well imagine what will happen to the economic issues. So there is a urgent need for improving, modifying legal and justice system. On top of that, I'm not sounding very negative, but the fact is, which all of us know, you must also be knowing in Karnataka, lethargic, insensitive, inefficient bureaucracy. I'm not going to elaborate the issue of a lethargic, insensitive, inefficient bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is a backbone of any decision implementation. If a political class takes a decision to exploit opportunities, but implementation part has to be by the bureaucracy. What kind of a bureaucracy we have? Well, this needs to be bugged up, inefficient, have to be removed. But can we do that? It's a very, very big challenge, you see. Though Government of India has started retiring some inefficient people, but it's still way out. And on further, we have archaic labor laws. Only 3 states, Madhya Pradesh, UP, and one more state, I'm forgetting his name. They have given some relaxation in terms of the labor laws for 1,000 days. In terms of the prevailing situation. But labor laws need to be changed. You can hire a person, but you can't fire a person, even though he's inefficient. And then Inspector Raj, labor inspectors visit, and they can trouble you. Which industry would like to invest money in case you find that this industry is always afraid of maintaining huge records of labor issues? So that needs to be changed. And another problem is land acquisition. Land is a very basic input for expansion of industrial development. And all of you know that how Land Acquisition Act was passed and how tricky is it, where if you want to buy a land, you have to take permission of a group of villagers as such, and high prices they ask you have to pay them. Acquiring land is a very big issue. I don't know whether the present dispensation will be able to improve upon Land Acquisition Act. And then is a corruption. I think specter of corruption is a very big challenge. I'm not making any comment on whether it's increased or decreased, but it exists. If it exists, it eats the vitals of the economy, eats into the vital of decisions, eats into the very basic issues where favors are shown. So opportunities do exist, but corruption reduces their quantum. And one more issue which I will like to put across to you, that is the political class and system, you see. I think for exploiting opportunities, a very big challenge in terms of how our polity responds. If we are very argumentative, we have to pull each other's legs. This is what is happening for the last few years in this country. Then opportunities cannot be exploited per se. So there has to be some kind of consensus among the political parties for achieving high rate of growth, becoming vibrant, Atmanirbhar, exploit opportunities. But if we keep on criticizing for sake of that and indulge in some saber rattling, perhaps it becomes a very big challenge. And lastly, my dear friends, not the least, because there are many more, regulatory and control measures. I think India is one of the very few countries in the world where still regulation and control are very, very high, you see. So in a nutshell, I will put across to you, challenges are more than the opportunities. And you may ask me a question here, do we see a road ahead. In my considered opinion, there is a road ahead. There is a silver lining. Silver lining is we have a stable government at center, very, very vibrant leader like Mr. Modi, very efficient team. And this vibrant leadership of Mr. Modi can help the Indian economy to face more challenges in a stoic fashion and incorporate strategies to exploit opportunities so that sum total of opportunities exploited become more than the challenges over a period of time. How much time frame? Well, difficult to say, but certainly this present dispensation is capable. But how far this present dispensation does it, how far is allowed, is a big question that needs to be elaborated. And I think we need to be positive about Atmanirbhar Bharat, and this positivity is the key issue. One last issue which before I just rest here, and that is we as Indians need to change. It is not the government which can do everything. It is not the companies which can do everything. We Indians. And we Indians in terms of our attitude. And we have to shed the attitude of pessimism and adopt the attitude of optimism. Oh yes, we Indians can do that. We Indians are capable. And when we say positive attitude, attitude needs to be changed. And there was one great economist, many of you may be knowing, my dear friends in faculty, Simon Kuznets. He listed 6 factors in economic growth, modern economic growth, like resources, technology, institutions, trade. And one of the major factors he listed was attitude. Unless you have a right and positive attitude, the growth may come, but growth may not become modern economic growth, you see. Anyway, this is all I want to share with you. I could have spoken more, but time is not there with me. So I will be able to be in a position to answer any question that arises at any time during the discussion. Thank you very much for patient hearing. Thank you.
Andanga, sir.
Thank you.
Andanga, sir. Yeah. Andanga, sir, please continue.
Mr. Lingamurthy, I have finished my presentation.
Yeah, it's okay, sir. Just moderator, I'm requesting. There may be network problem. Yeah, it's okay. Now I welcome CA Dr. Naval Kishore Bajaj to express his views on Atmanirbhar Bharat. Then later on we will have question and answers. I welcome Naval Kishore Bajaj.
Thank you, Professor Lingamurthy. Good morning, my friends from DESP and BVSS. First of all, I pay my greetings to the august presence of Professor Alagwadi, DN School of Business Studies, Professor Pushpa Savadatti, Head of DESP, Professor Pandurang Patti, our moderator, and Dr. Lingamurthy and Dr. Baswaraj from DESP. I also am very glad to have this opportunity to speak with Dr. Loraya and the caliber and the stature that he has. So it is always a delight to listen to him. Especially, I would like to thank Professor Lingamurthy to connect BVSS to an esteemed university such as Central University of Karnataka and give us an opportunity to share our thoughts. See, Bharatiya Vitt Salahkar Samiti, BVSS, is basically an organization of finance professionals of India. And we do a lot of activities which help us in influencing the government decisions, government policies, as well as the policies of the various premier institutions related to finance professionals like Institute of Chartered Accountants, company secretaries, cost and works accountants, etc. As part of our economic think tank activity during this COVID crisis, we have been giving suggestions to the government, and some of them I'm very glad to share with you that they have been implemented as well. So whatever learnings and questions we are going to take from today's session here, if there are any aspects that have missed our side, I would note them and take it back to the forums where they need to be addressed. Guys, it is hard to talk, speak after Laraiya ji, who is such a prolific speaker, and he has actually covered almost every important topic in his speech. Being a chartered accountant, I would like to focus my discussion on finance, India-China comparison in a way, and some sector-specific aspects. Where are we right now? So there are very high expectations from India. We have performed well, but still not up to the expectations. After the very good mandate that the recent central government got, the people were saying that India could grow at 8%, 9%, given the political capital that it has generated. But due to certain bottlenecks, we have not been able to perform that much. Still, we are much ahead of the other world economies, and it is enviable growth, I must say. But still, we have not met the expectations. Now, what are the factors that impact the long-term growth rate of any economy? To me, there are three key factors that impact this. The first one is the supply of labor, such as working age population growth, participation of women, what is the retirement age, etc. So basically, labor. Second is the level of investment that we can have. Thirdly, it is the total factor productivity, TFP. As you all are economists, you would be knowing what I'm talking about. Now, basically, in India, we are placed very well on all of these fundamentals. As per various studies that I have seen recently, by 2030, close to 1/5 of the world's working age population, which means the population between 15 years of age to 64 years of age, will be Indian, 1/5 of the world's working age population. That means we might be adding in 1 year, we might be adding total population of Philippines in single 1 year. And it is going to be a youthful median age of 28 years, which means we will be 10 years below the median age in China. And the supply of labor will be India's key advantage. China's working age population, in comparison, already peaked in 2015, and it is on a track to decline by 27 million in the year 2030, as per the current studies. Now, at around 30%, India's investment to GDP ratio is high by the global standards, but it still needs to increase to be able to achieve a real growth rate of 6%, which means a nominal growth rate of 9 to 9.5%. Now, who will drive this investment? Guys, I feel that we have limited resources. Our domestic investment resources are limited, so it has to be driven by the private corporate sector. See, the private corporate sector is likely to remain the main source of investment, followed by households like me and you, and then the public sector. Public sector is largely going to be expected to focusing on infrastructure sector spending, which needs to increase further by at least 2% of GDP, which is a big amount. And just to share with all of you, projects worth $1.4 trillion are already in the process of being drawn up under the National Infrastructure Pipeline, NIP. We need more investment from abroad to fund this, since our domestic investment resources are limited. Now, if we wonder, which economies have been exporting manufacturers already moved to or are planning to move to recently after the COVID crisis. You would be reading in the newspapers, so much of discussion is happening around the world that how many people that there are many investors waiting to move from China and create a China alternative. So as per the study which is done by UBS, the economies that have which have recently got benefited based on the movement out of China or creating a parallel supply chain option in against China. The first country which has been benefited is Vietnam, and the second is none other than India. And after us, we have Malaysia and then Japan. It is a good trend, my friends. And I feel that with government efforts and the clear direction that government has taken, we are going to be further benefited by this global trend. According to estimates, 2020 could be a record year for FDI with US dollar 161 billion estimated to be in the pipeline, which is nothing but double of what we got in 2019. By the way, what we got in 2019 was itself a record. Now, Indian policymakers are taking steps to benefit from firms adopting a China plus one strategy to diversify supply chain risks. Right now, China has many linkages to the global supply chain where only China is the supplier. There is no other economical alternative. And all the countries, all the big corporations have realized this risk given the current political scenario and lack of transparency from our neighbor country. And right now, they are basically working on China plus one strategy. I would not say they are going to move out of China completely, but they are definitely trying to create another alternative. Now, despite having essential resources like land, which we have a very good land bank, low-cost labor we have, coal, but India has missed out on developing a strong manufacturing setup. Our services have been really fantastic, but what happens is the services will have a smaller multiplier effect on capital expenditures and employment. So what government is trying to do is, government is trying to focus more on manufacturing sector while maintaining the service sector where it is or taking it forward further. But there is a clear focus by government on the manufacturing sector. If someone goes and reads through the Atmanirbhar Bharat package guidelines. The government, cognizant of this, aims to raise the manufacturing sector's contribution to GDP to 25%. That is the target from around 16% where we are currently, which is a big gap. 9% of GDP is a big amount. Now, how to do that? And India's export share is 1.7%, global export share, while China is 13.2%. India's total factor productivity growth has been well below the 3% threshold. But all the countries in the past which have shown a growth rate of 8%, 9% that we are targeting, they have a better total factor productivity, and India definitely needs to work on this. But the growth drivers, as I mentioned earlier, we have deeply structural growth drivers, and that is why we can say that our growth will be sustainable. Now, having discussed where we are and where we could be, what are the main obstacles and what we need to do? Now, in my view, based on the discussion with various forums in economic think tank as well as other organizations, and also various studies that are available, in the public domain, we can say that there are 4 or 5 key hurdles or obstacles. The first one was the tax rates, but I am saying it was because it has already been resolved. The tax rates in India used to be the highest, but now we have already made them very, very attractive. For a new facility to be set up, effective tax rate will be around 17%, which is equivalent to 17%, which is there in Singapore, which is the lowest in the world, I think, one of the lowest in the world. And if we talk about the existing facilities, it is around 25% effective tax rate, which is very comparable to China. So I think this hurdle is already gone. What are the other hurdles? As Laroya ji spoke about, banks and non-banks, lending scope. Yes, this is a big hurdle. Are we able to give loans? Are we able to, get the money back? How efficient is our financial sector? So banks and non-banks, insufficient lending scope, regulatory framework, and contract enforcement. This has been a complicated process, and government has already done some things, and it is in the process of doing certain things. For example, India Bankruptcy Code has been already done. So this will go a long way in improving the contract enforcement side, as well as improving the overall, business risk situation for the entrepreneurship. Secondly, financial inclusion, which means a nationwide rollout of basic bank accounts. That has been seen as a huge success abroad also and within India. Now, public sector banks, they still need reforms. They are in the process of that. Merging and allocating capital to the most efficient ones has been done. Mergers have been planned. Some mergers have been done. Some further are being done. Capital has been infused. But in the financial sector, in the banking sector, major issue, if you ask me, is that currently our banks, especially on the public sector side, they are not geared up to evaluate the business proposals the way it should be. See, I'm a chartered accountant, and based on my discussion with the people, my friends who are in practice or who will, help their clients in arranging the loans, how it works is, the top managements of the banks might decide or drive very good policies, but effectively when it comes to the Babuji, he was only looking at the chartered accountant's project report signed by a CA. Based on that, he will give the loan or not give the loan. But is that his job? It is not his fault. The fault lies with the training, the system it has been in the past. So I think evaluation of credit proposals needs to go a sea change in the way we evaluate in the banking sector, especially on the public sector bank side. And I'm not talking about big proposals. I am talking about smaller proposals. The bigger proposals anyways get, they land in the board of directors level. And in any case, we don't see a big challenge in their evaluation unless and until there is a management override of controls, which has been seen recently in the past. But especially on the funding to the MSME sector or funding to the below or micro sector, I should say, that particular credit appraisal process needs to see a change. We need to train our bankers how to evaluate a good business proposal. How are angel investors able to invest in startups which our traditional bankers are not able to do? Simply because they are just going by procedures. But procedures cannot override or cannot substitute the human intelligence. No computer can substitute human intelligence. You have to judge it on your own. So and another important aspect is we don't have really a long-term lender right now. See, ICICI has also been converted into a retail bank, and we really need an institution which can help in long-term lending effectively. Coming to the infrastructure bottlenecks, see, some power sector reforms have been done, but the very key other reforms which are still in progress are related to dedicated rail freight corridors and highway build-out programs. Another aspect is availability of skilled labor quality. This is another bottleneck. Now, if we see, we have more than 100, 110 labor laws existing in the country. I, being in the corporate audit department of an MNC, I also face this day in and day out. We are not confident that which law, which notice will come which day. And every state will have a separate labor law. And, sometimes they're very funny. Sometimes they might just talk about putting a notice in place or putting a particular, storage space in a particular way. And if you're not doing it, you are subject to the penalties. In fact, they need to be made more effective. And effectively, the current labor laws are actually not protecting the labor interests either. So I am not advocating that you dilute the rights of the labor. What we need to do is we need to balance between the rights of the labor as well as the flexibility of entrepreneurs in terms of managing their labor, as well as transparency, simplification, and less overhead. In terms of administrative and regulatory burdens, see, we have done wonderful job in UID, and where we have done biometrics based registration system that allows for direct subsidy benefit transfer, easy enrollment for bank accounts and other services. Electronic project approvals with tracking and clear timelines, e-auctioning, private mining, all this is happening. But GST, although it has been a big reform, but GST, we have to ultimately lower the number of tax brackets and create equal conditions across the states, which is still not done. It is a long way to go till there. And most importantly, I think Naroya ji also spoke about it. Long legal and land acquisition processes need to be simplified. That is one thing where China did much better than us in the past, and that is why they are where they are. So our land acquisition regulation and law, which was started by Modi government immediately after they came into power in 2014. I remember that this was their first agenda, but based on so much of pushback by the opposition and all the political pressure that came on, they have kind of dumped this idea. I don't know what is happening right now, but this is something which cannot be left out. It has to be worked at. Now, coming to what have been our achievements. So I will not repeat what Naroya ji already mentioned. He has already mentioned some key achievements. But one important achievement, which I would also like to mention, is India has become Samsung's second largest handset producing location. Apple plans to move 1/5 of its China capacity to India over the next 5 years. And already you would have seen the news today in the newspaper. Discussions are going on in the Chennai. And iPhone assembly partner Pegatron is planning to set up shop in India as well. India is now accounting for 1/5 of global production in cell phones and is a net exporter. By the studies, by 2025, if India is able to upscale to more value add, then it will help creating 20 lakh new jobs by 2025, as per the study done by Credit Suisse. Now, our ease of doing business ranking is still low. It is at 77, but it is improving. At the same time, China is at 46. So we have a long way to go. So what I want to mention, in terms of the way to go, what we have to do from here, I would like to go back to the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan launching speech by our finance minister. She mentioned 5 pillars and she mentioned factors of production. What are those 5 pillars? Economy, infrastructure, technology-driven systems, demography, and demand. We have all that. But interestingly, in factors of production, she said the factors of production are being redefined, and they are land, labor, liquidity, and law. If you notice, normally in economic studies, we will say factors of production is land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. But she mentioned liquidity and law, considering the COVID situation. And I am in full agreement with her, because liquidity is the most important aspect in the current business scenario. If the enterprises who are having cash and good working capital will definitely survive and then achieve greater heights in the coming years. But the enterprises, the business where we don't have liquid funds, could actually go to closure. And we have seen some examples like that already. And on the law side, I think she was highlighting the contract enforcement, that due to the crisis situation, people should work in an ethical way. It should not be that taking the advantage of crisis situation, we start not non-enforcement of the contracts. We should honor our commitments, and government also will make sure that the contractual enforcement is done. And that is what I think she meant by that. And I'm in full agreement to her. But I would also like to add to this, the 4 L's that are given by our Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman ji are land, labor, liquidity, and law. But I think they need to be married to the 4 W's of the corporate terminology. The 4 W's are why, where, who, what, and how can also be added as a 5th one. Unless and until you define the operational guidelines of this package in a very effective way, we will not be able to reach the target that we have set for ourselves. And why I'm trying to mention it is that government has launched very good policies, but they have to be ultimately put into place by our bureaucracy. And bureaucracy needs a mindset change, and we are working towards that. The mindset of the bureaucracy should not be that if this guy is breaching on this provision, then this penalty should be put and that penalty should be put. Rather, the law should be made to enable an honest person, an honest entrepreneur, an honest employee, an honest citizen. Our laws are currently made in a way that are targeting to catch or target the indisciplined lot. Yes, that has to be done. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be done, but the focus should be on the enablement part than to catch hold of the non-compliant people. But that also highlights the situation of or the kind of confidence that our bureaucracy doesn't have on its citizenship. So are we ethical enough so that they can trust us? I have a question for this forum. Let us try to think that if all the lockdown guidelines that were issued for the first lockdown and the second lockdown, if they were adhered to by our citizens, by our brothers and sisters in the right way, in the letter and spirit, in the first 2 lockdowns, will India be landing in the current situation where we are today? My answer is no. We would not have landed into this situation. But because of indiscipline, because of lack of integrity, because of a thought of taking a pride in breaking the rules, we have landed into this situation. And this is reflecting into our bureaucracy mindset as well. So I think citizens and bureaucracy needs to come together, but more responsibility will lie on the bureaucracy to frame the laws to enable rather than to catch hold of people who are not compliant. This is my another take. Now, Dr. Loraya raised a very interesting point about the article which has been written recently by Arvind Panagadia ji. He is a very renowned and very respected economist, and I have deep respect for him. But I will share slightly different view. See, I think it has been already to some extent accepted by the Indian government establishment that the Western school of thought on economics may not be truly beneficial to us. And I think all the government policies so far and decisions are reflecting towards that. Government is going towards the old school of thoughts that India had. Whether we talk about Arthashastra of Kautilya, or the famous Tamil thinker Thiruvallu. In fact, our chief economic advisor, Dr. Krishnamurthy, has authored economic survey that talks about ethical wealth creation for a prosperous India. And I invite all the students and all the gentlemen here, ladies, to go through that economic survey. It's very interesting. What I want to say is, Arvind Pangadia ji has taken an example of mobile phone industry and said that it has not worked in the past to do import substitution, so we should not be targeting that. My view is we have to take a two-pronged approach. One, we have to focus on some specific priority sectors which are strategically important and which have a big potential for India. And at the same time, we have to keep substituting the imports, especially the imports which are coming from China, which is an adverse country, or any other country which is adverse. And also we have to build our capability. Now let's talk about mobile phones, which Pangadia ji has elaborated in his recent article. My personal view is that if we look at the similar example of auto industry, when auto industry came to India, we didn't have technology. All the equipment was brought from abroad, and basically assembly was happening, and the value addition was quite limited. I think in India also, the mobile, the cell phone manufacturing, even if we have reached net, as I mentioned earlier, the net, we are net gainer in the export and import, but our value addition is quite limited. Still, we are creating jobs. And what will happen eventually, in my view, is that once we have assembly set up here, then entrepreneurs will automatically start looking for the local supply chain, and that will automatically create an ecosystem that will help us in generating more employment, more technology, and better value addition, which currently we are not doing. It is a journey. Look at auto sector. We had nothing. Right now, our auto part sector is already supplying and exporting globally. My previous employer, Honda Cars, has recently announced that they will turn their India plants, 2 plants they have in Delhi NCR, they will turn them into an export hub within Honda affiliates. So this trend is already there, but how we have reached here is a journey. The journey started by assembly, then by slowly localizing the parts, localizing the technology, and right now we are in a stage to export. So I feel the same will happen going forward for India also. What are the priority sectors in my view? See, I think you would be reading in the newspapers anyways. So on the services side, but as per UBS study, which I recently got an opportunity to read, e-commerce is going to be the next game changer for India. In fact, as per that study, if I look at the figures, as of now, just a second. Yeah. So e-commerce as of now in 2019, we were at around 50 billion US dollars. As per the study, by 2030, in next 10 years, we have the potential to go to 350 billion US dollars simply in e-commerce, given the capability that we have, given the market we have, given the reach of smartphones that we have, and broadband and everything else, which means 7 times where we are right now. But there is another point I want to raise in terms of e-commerce. The most important point is, as of now, all our startups, most of the unicorn startups have capital from China. Why is it that India cannot create its own capital? In a recent discussion with Mohandas Pai ji, he had also proposed, and I think government is already contemplating this, that whether our institutions, our financial institutions, which are rich in cash, like LIC and others, whether they can start contributing in a optimized and a calculated way to the fund of funds, and which can later on be financing our startups. But we need to think about innovative ideas, that how can the foreigners, especially the country like China, is able to fund these startups. They are doing good, but in India we don't have capital, capital to invest in this. Now, I am not saying there is nothing. We have local investors in Bangalore who have invested and they have got returns as well. But as an overall ecosystem, I think this needs to develop further. My next discussion after e-commerce as a priority sector will be on pharma. Especially Laroya ji spoke about APIs. See, a very peculiar point on the APIs I would like to inform to everyone. Till 2005, we had a lot of APIs together. And right now, in 2020, we are seeing that we are totally dependent on China. Such a big pharma industry, such an important strategic industry of India is totally dependent on APIs of China. How did it happen? It has happened because China was subsidizing its materials being sent to India, and that all was done on the behest of their government. That is what is suspected. And because of that, our domestic industry went in a bad shape. There is another aspect, that we have a lot of pollution here in India. And the only way to tackle this pollution thing, because it directly impacts the APIs, is to actually promote API parks, which government is discussing right now within their own functions. And we need to promote these API parks with common facilities to support all environment issues and make API manufacturing competitive. And then only we will be able to slowly substitute what we are getting from China. Another aspect is the medical equipment. Right now, the medical equipment is all coming from abroad. We don't have trust on our own medical equipment, maybe because of the quality. I am not an expert in the healthcare sector, so I will not comment on that. But what I have recently heard and read, that even our nurses are not trained to handle sophisticated ventilators. So there have been cases where the patients have choked recently on oversupply of oxygen. So that means our entire healthcare sector and the ecosystem needs to go a change. And a holistic picture has to be seen. My friends, I'll tell you another important and very interesting fact. China has introduced learning of its traditional medicine, which is called TCM, I think, into their MBBS equivalent syllabus. And it was done 20 years ago. So their doctors are very well conversant with their traditional medicine also. And right now, China is basically fighting COVID situation majorly using the traditional Chinese medicine. And we all know that we have a lot of capability. We have Ayurveda, which is very effective. We also have capabilities in India on the other medicines, Unani and others, homeopathy. But unfortunately, in the curriculum of Indian doctors, we don't have that included. And that is why when you go to a very qualified, allopathy doctor, he will simply say, either this is, I don't know anything about it, or he will simply say, I cannot vouch for it. And that will shake the confidence of the patient. Although there is a medicine available, which is good for the patient, but our prescription system, our doctors are not equipped or educated on those parts. And that is why we are lacking. But we have to learn this from China. They have done it. And now, currently, what is happening is the Ayush Ministry has been set up and it has taken certain initiatives, but it needs to go one level further. I think I have in recent discussions, it has been learned that there are many medicines that have been created by Ayurveda or other different schools of medicine. They have been proposed to Ayush Ministry, but ultimately the approval is required from ICAMR. And ICAMR is basically influenced by the allopathy because they don't have the knowledge of the other schools. And that is why approvals are not getting done, even if the medicine has been tested and thousands of tests have been made. This is I'm sharing based on closed door conversations with a very senior person. So we need some policies to manage this situation. Another important aspect is, do we have insurance policies which will cover the hospitalization under other schools like homeopathy? I got to know from a friend in insurance industry that there are some policies, insurance policies, which are available, which will cover the homeopathy hospitalization, but there is no proper hospital for that. So the point that I'm trying to arrive at is we need a complete ecosystem for the other medicine schools also, apart from allopathy, and we need to synchronize that so that our citizens are healthy. Another important aspect is Ayurveda basically focuses, and yoga basically focuses on prevention rather than prescription, and that has to come into the mainstream. If you are already prevented from a disease, then why will you go for expensive medication? That has also to be brought into the ecosystem, and we need to plan for the availability of the raw materials. Because our vaccines are the best we have the biggest, one of the biggest industries in the world. On the NPAs, Dr. Loraya, pointed out on, the situation on the NPAs. I'm not going into the data part of it. To understand what is NPA is basically if someone is not able to pay his, loan repayment installment for regularly 3 months, then a bank can categorize that as NPA. To be very simply put. Now, in current situation, government has allowed banks not to categorize certain loans where because of the moratorium that if they don't get the payments, then they should not categorize it NPA. But NPA is not equivalent to fraud. And again, I'm coming back to the same situation, same discussion which I mentioned initially. Our banking sector has to improve its way of assessment of various loans, and they should be able to work out a way where they should be able to find out whether it's a genuine NPA, where entrepreneur has actually got business trouble not because of his bad intentions, but the overall business situation versus bad business proposals, bad credit proposals. So I think the root cause is there, and I think discussion is already happening. But it's a snail space. It needs to improve. The board of directors of public sector banks are, very much involved into this. BVSS also had has a forum on board of directors of public sector banks and undertakings. And based on those discussions that happened there, I can assure you that all the board of directors are really pushing, this agenda, and we should see the results. But yes, it will take some time. On the real estate, I have just one point to make. In real estate, especially on the group housing side, we see a trend has come where, and I'm talking about prior to COVID, that the buyer stopped buying any kind of under construction property. While till 2011 or 2012, a lot of buyers were buying under construction properties. But after that, now, if you ask me, after 2018 or 2019, people stopped it. And what was the reason? The reason was delay in delivery of flats, especially in the Delhi NCR. It's a big problem. What you say, the various forensic audits of these important builders have shown diversion of funds. So basically, it has resulted in a lack of trust. And the lack of trust has put a lot of bearing on the industry per se, which is one of the biggest employer after agriculture. Real estate is one of the biggest employer. Now, it is a big problem. there are no clear solutions. But I think there are developers which have been transparent in the past, which have managed their funds properly, which have maintained their working capital properly. For example, Godrej, they have funds and they are continuing with a good fund, and they will continue to give value to their customers. On the other hand, there are bad examples like JP Amrapali, which are in Supreme Court. So what I'm trying to highlight here is, again, ethical wealth creation is important, and implementation of contractual enforcement law, that is also important. On startups, I already shared my thoughts on the fund of funds and the availability of our capital. But I think there has been a boon also to some of them. Like, for example, I think the most benefited sector has been the online meeting sector. It's not a sector, it's a kind of, some of the service providers. Everyone has used Zoom and, Microsoft Teams and Google Meet and, Skype and all that, which was never used in the past. It was always thought that, it is a privilege of the corporates, they will sit in a very good, nice meeting room and have an international call on these forums. But now we are, using these forums in a regular way and utilizing the benefit of efficiency. And it has helped these startups. So there is an opportunity. Similarly, if you look at Practo.com, they are, giving telemedicine. You can talk to your doctor on video. In fact, in Arogya, telemedicine has been a boon to the rural sector also. The doctors of Delhi, Bangalore, they are able to connect to the rural areas on video, on telemedicine, and they are able to guide and diagnose. So it is an opportunity. And thirdly, a very interesting recent trend is that industries are looking to monitor the efficiency of work from home. And now the tools have come in the market which can actually track whether a person is actually working at his home on his laptop or desktop or not. So for them, it is a boon apart from the industry like PPE kits and all, which Laroya ji mentioned. So at last, concluding my remarks, and then we can go for questions maybe. I would like to simply say that we have to focus on ethical wealth creation, and this has to be done at all levels, because it has to be done by government also, by officials, bureaucrats, by businessmen, but by people like us also. And you all are the students. You all are the future of the country. And I would like to say, and call upon you to follow this principle in future. Some of you might be economic policy creators later on. Some of you might be in some very responsible positions later on. But please, my request to all of you is keep ethics and integrity in mind whenever you are deciding something. Because if India has to be made great, if India has to be brought back to glory, then ethics are the most important. With these words, I'll conclude my deliberation, and I'll request the organizers to take it forward.
Good afternoon, respected professors and co-participants. I am thankful to Professor Laraya and CA Bajaj sir. Now the session is open for questions. If you have any questions, please raise them, and experts, please stay with us to enlighten us. Participants, please raise your questions. Sir, one participant has given a question in his chat box. Why most states has lack of bureaucrat, empty space in all departments? Why most states have lack of bureaucrat, empty space in all departments? How they can work with full efficiency? Whatever he has typed, just I have read. Sir, are you able to hear me?
Sir, sorry, I missed your question. I couldn't understand it.
Why most states have lack of bureaucracy, empty space in all departments, how they can work with full efficiency. One
Okay,
expert, one
maybe the
participant.
question is about vacant positions lying in the government sector
I
and
think so.
other
I think so,
institutions,
sir.
right?
I think so, sir.
Yeah, I think my thought is, I think it is linked to the priority, as well as it is linked to the budget that is available. And again, the focus of government has now shifted to the fundamentals. But at the same time, I would say that again, as citizens, do we know how many people are paying their taxes properly? Not even 2% of the people are paying taxes to government, and then we expect government to give all the facilities in the right way. So my take is, and I think I'll invite Laroya ji's view also in this. My take is, we have a dual responsibility for this situation, and it has to be resolved. But I think it is linked to the resources as well as the prioritization of the government. Laroya ji, maybe you can add.
I think, Nawal, I agree with you 100%. But there's another issue also, there is staffing in the government offices. And the very archaic rules were made sometime in the 50s. And optimization has to be done. So I think what you said is right. If you add what I say, perhaps it becomes optimal.
I hope we
Thank
answered the
you.
question.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Any other questions, participants, please?
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, please. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are
Yes, we
audible.
can hear
Please
you.
raise your question, sir.
First of all, thank you so much, sir, for your very informative session. But I think you didn't talk about, sir, privatization. So my question is related to privatization, sir. That in the time of privatization of many important sectors gradually, as recently in railway and coal sectors, sir, how this privatization will help India to become Atmanirbhar, as more than half of the population is one way or other under BPL or having no skill or having no education. Then how will they get employment in this private sector, sir? Certainly,
I
it
think,
will help in
I think
hello, sir.
your question itself
Uh,
is very.
Laroya ji, can you take it?
I think. You see, moving towards privatization doesn't mean that you don't provide employment. You only provide employment as well as improve efficiency. And when you do not have sufficient resources in government command, or government has different priorities, why not railways have to be having some degree of privatization? Nothing bad about it. I think people shed the old notions that privatization is bad. Yes, privatization must be done with some regulation. Regulation must be minimum and control should also be minimum. Now, if DMRC, Delhi Metro Rail Corporation, runs, let's say, key routes like Delhi, Bombay, Delhi, Calcutta, Delhi, Chennai, what is bad about it? And how it is linked with the half of the population? So there will be increase in employment. And mind it, efficiency always increases employment. So employing more people in railways, the government does not mean that employment is the only objective. Objective is efficiency with more employment. Whether you need more efficiency and more employment to begin with, or you want more efficiency and more employment later on. That is a trade-off that you have to take a choices. I hope I have answered your question, my dear friend.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Any other questions? There is one question in the chat
May
box.
I may I add
Dr.
to what Laroya ji said? May I add to what Laroya ji said?
Please, sir. Please.
My point, in addition to what Laroya ji said about efficiency in privatization, see, I think the question also came from the thought that whether the job security and those things will be taken care in the privatized sector. See, I think we need to go to the current examples that we have before us. I am personally also working in a private sector. So, it is not like in private sector, you will always have a problematic work culture or the inhibition or the, anxiety about, whether we should get into a private sector, whether our job security will be there or not. These things have to be, kept aside from the mind. The most important part which has happened post-COVID is that people are now reskilling themselves. There are people, there were certain skills that existed and that were marketable earlier, but there are new skills that have to be learned. There are job losses. I acknowledge that there is a problem going on, but then there are winners also who are reskilling them, who are going into a direction which they had never taken earlier, and now they are a success story. I know some of them personally. So what I'm trying to say is that private sector and public sector, there always has to be a balance. And private sector will definitely bring in efficiency, but at the same time, in the strategic sectors, public sector must be there so that they can control over the profit, motive of the privatization. So a balance will always work, and it will always be a continuous debate on which sector it should be privatized and which not. But it is a fact that we cannot live without private sector. Simply because I spoke in my presentation about the resource constraints, from where how much percentage of the GDP we need additionally as an investment, and government doesn't have money. So from where the money will come? Either the government will take loans in terms of sovereign bonds and everything which they are anyways planning to do. But apart from that, they will have to give opportunity to the foreign institutional investors, big corporates like from US and other countries, who are interested in India's market. What they will do is they will bring in technology, they will bring in efficiency, they will bring in jobs, and then India will prosper overall. That is what the new concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat is.
Professor Patti, just I want to interfere. What our students are interested in knowing is, yes, private sector we have to invite, no issue. But then whether where in India is a village economy, where more than half of the population lives in rural area, and they do not have access to even basic 2 square meals, literacy, and talking about this sophistication and all that, it will benefit hardly a marginal, top 5 or 10% of the population. So Ravi's question is, what about the remaining 60%? Yes, we do agree. So you have to create a level playing field for them. You bring all of them to that level so that they will also have an access and their quality of life will be enhanced. Perhaps that raise his apprehension, I suppose. So whether that can be addressed, if so, how it can be. That is the thing.
Let me pitch in here, you see, we have to be forward-looking economy. Definitely, the rural economy is very important. There are ways to improve rural economy, and things are happening in a very big way. But saying that rural economy is not available, that's why we should have a privatization. Perhaps that is not a kind of a diagnostics.
No,
I think what we need to do is we have to have a balance. There have to be strategies by which government should get priority. It is the role of state governments here becoming very important. Create more education facilities in rural areas. And Manrega, for example, is a big failure. I was a friend of mine who is teaching in MIT. 10 lakh was sanctioned for making a one marginal bund. And every year they sanction 10 lakhs, and every year floods come from across Nepal. That one gets dissolved. Why not we create a permanent or semi-permanent infrastructure in Manrega? Open poultry farms, have a animal husbandry or milk production. Things can change. But simply saying that, well, privatization will not help simply because there are more than 50% people live in areas. We also need to think beyond this. So we just be modern in our outlook rather than getting back to the 1950s or 60s. There should be balance as such.
I do agree, Professor Loria, but the thing is, we need to go on war footing to
Yes.
uplift the rural economy. Unless we do that, because you said we have to open more schools and more colleges, and today, even in rural areas, even my domestic helper is not interested in sending her children to the government school because there is no quality. She wants to send her children to the private school. So we need to do something on a war footing to enhance the quality of living in government colleges, schools. Unless we do that, I feel that we are not against privatization. We have to move with the water. It has to be dynamic, but then it may lead to lopsided development of the economy, and that's what is happening today. If you see crony capitalism, or hardly top 2% of the people or 10% of the people are owning 70% of the national wealth, and whatever the resources, incomes generated as a result of economic growth are not distributed equally among the citizens of the people, among the citizens of the economy. It is eaten away by very few people. So how do you address the issue? That is the thing.
Let me just comment here. See, 50% of the school education is a private education in India. And if you try to reduce the controls and regulations, there will be more and more schools will be opened. And if more schools are open, more spread of education also will take place. So definitely there has to be a balanced approach. But one issue cannot overshadow another in private education. Both have to go hand in hand, and that's why we said backward and forward linkages have to be created. I think it's a long-term strategies are required. I think more inclusive growth is required, but more inclusive growth are supposed to see in terms of how fast we grow it. Merely having inclusive growth is not sufficient unless to grow faster, you have to think innovative ways. And privatization is one of the innovative ways.
Yeah. And
I have one question here.
To add to Dr.
Naval
Loria.
Kishorji, just a second. Let me finish my question, then you can take. Actually, there is some voice noise. Maybe Pandang Upadhyay sir, can you mute your mic? I think there is a disturbance. Yeah, if you look at the FDI pattern and their investment is there only where they can get a lot of profits. They are not investing in the creation of infrastructure. They are not investing in the creation of employment opportunities in this country. They came for their own profit, not for serving this country. And now we are inviting them in each field where employment is being generated all these years. Now, in the past scenario, if you look at where they are not creating any employment or not retaining the employees already, they are there. So in this situation, whether Atmanirbhar Bharat is going to success by creating employment opportunities to the Indian workforce, and if we are not able to provide employment opportunities to all the people, it is absolutely going to fail, because ultimately we need to have employment opportunities to each and every one. Then only each and every person can contribute in the national wealth. So that kind of policies we have to adopt, and then only India will grow sustainable way. That's not my point. If you have anything,
May I add to what Loria ji has said, and Professor Lingamurthy, I would also like to answer your question and Professor Pushpa's point. See, we have to basically see what can immediately work for us, and we have to see what is the long-term vision. When we talk about rural economy, it will not be right to say that government has ignored it in Atmanirbhar Bharat. In fact, I am, on record saying, based on my own assessment, we have never seen these kind of reforms earlier for the agriculture sector. The agriculture sector was not in so much focus, and in fact, government very clearly knows that if India has to come out of the COVID crisis, then it is the rural economy which will bring it out, because the monsoon has been good and rural economy till now has not been much impacted by the COVID crisis. There are so many things which have been announced in the Atmanirbhar Bharat package about agriculture focus. In BVSS also we have done multiple discussions with Kisan Sangh, and we have understood the challenges. But the challenge which comes in agriculture is it is a state subject because it's directly related to land. So a uniform policy, making, etc., is required apart from the economical incentives that the central government can give. And government is already working on it, to my knowledge. A lot of things are being done, a lot of things will be done. Agri-tech, agri-technology related startups are being promoted. They are already in touch with government, so that the food and packaging industry should be just next to where we are. And we have to go back, as I said initially, go back to the initial thoughts of Indian economy. We in our traditional economy, agriculture was the base. We were still
Sir, it seems there is some problem from Bajaj sir side. See Bajaj sir side. We are not able to hear you, sir.
Ms. Pandanga, can I pitch in now?
Yeah.
Bajaj comes. Recent reforms in the Government of India regarding Essential Commodity Act, free movement of agriculture products across states. There is a change in APM, Agriculture Prices Marketing Committee. These reforms are taking place. I think gradually things are happening. So I think privatization and rural development can no contradiction between the two. And definitely we need to have inclusive, doubt about that. Any more questions?
Thank you, sir. Any other questions from participants? Sir, there are some questions in chat box also. Any other questions? Otherwise, we will take questions from chat box.
Sir, good morning. This is Sujata here. Hello.
Okay.
Is it audible? Hello.
Yeah, madam, you are audible. Please, madam, you are audible. You can ask the question.
Okay, sir. Actually, in Indian education system nowadays, the education system has been increased, and many of the rural area also, the education system, private and government sector also, they are trying to improve. But then also, it is not that employment oriented. Because earlier, my father experience, he tells that earlier we were getting as a only BA, BCom, but they were calling as a government job, or many different type of jobs were available. But nowadays, it is after finish completion of the double degree or PhD or any other different training, immediately we don't get easily job. So what is the reason? And one more thing, the software engineers, it is a lot of competition in the market sector. After completion of only simply as any engineering degree, they don't get any job. After completion of engineering degree, they have to be complete the many different software programs as time to time, whatever the changes it will take place. So why we should not the syllabus kind of, or the way that as our teaching methods are there, why not we can change that instead of looking into the foreign universities and all that? So why not we can empower our students or encourage to them towards to the increased employment level or as entrepreneur sector? What is the problem actually we are facing in India to get the employability?
The main problem is that there is lack of interface. There is a interface required. You try to create that kind of curriculum. Vocational colleges, the employability increases. According to one survey, 60% of engineers who pass out do not get jobs simply because they are not useful for the employment by the companies. And curriculum is outdated. Barring few universities, curriculum. So interface has to be there. That's why there has to be a lot of discussion between the education planners and the industry. So what industry requires better skills, better people man those activities. Perhaps if that is done, I think the employment can be eased. But if you don't, the problem. And secondly, all those question of your BA program, BCom program, they don't offer much skills except getting a Babu's job in a government office. But how many jobs are available? So as Naval was saying, you have to reskill, make them more vocational studies, colleges, more vocational training, and maybe you have to open such institutions more in rural areas. That can help. But it's a long-term affair, requires a lot of investment, thinking, as well as planning on the part of the government and private sector both. It's not an easy solution.
Yeah, Laroya ji,
sir, one more. Sir, my opinion, I think our youth know half in their life, half of the life they spend only to get the education. Up to 40, 45 also they try to get the education to get some better job. So is it no any solution for that? Because remaining only the healthy life will be remaining another 5 or 10. But till 40, 45 years they try to get only education to get the better job. So I think it's not our youth that energy is we're spending only to get the education, but not settle in life. I feel in India it's happening that.
Ma'am, there has to be some policies meant for self-employment as well as having skills to start entrepreneurship. I think these are the solutions. You say that only government will provide jobs, perhaps that's too much to expect. You need to have a look at a holistic view at even in US, you see, this is happening. A lot of entrepreneurs are there. The government cannot provide to everybody. You see, pandemic, when jobs are lost, unemployment rates have gone up. So question is, you have to see the employment problem from different points of view, and there's no easy solutions are available.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, madam. Any other questions, please? Any participants wish to ask any questions? If there are no questions, we can wind up the session. So before wind up, we want to have some words from both of you, sir, Professor Loria and Professor C.A. Sir. Sir, Professor Loria. There is some connectivity problem. Sir, your voice is not audible, sir.
Dr. Pati, are you talking to me?
Yes. No, madam. Professor Loria. But I want anything, madam? Madam, any questions?
Dr. Pushpa made a very important point, and unfortunately I got disconnected in between. So I was talking about agriculture at that time. So on the agriculture side, see, we need to take it together, and I think government is trying to take it together along with others. So when we speak about FDI and other things, it doesn't mean that we need to ignore agriculture, but to bring something which is in bad shape right now up to a level will take time. So I will give you an example of defense production. Our defense production was in very nascent stage when the around 2014, 2015, if I'm not wrong. And at that time, government had taken a policy initiative that, okay, we will get into the defense production side. There were so much reform and structural changes in the way things were done was required that for the initial 5 to 6 years, we saw some progress, but not much. But right now, if you ask me, based on that, those structural changes that have already been done, the defense production is expected to double in next few years, from $7 billion to double, because now we have reached that stage that we have those structure in place, we have those policies in place, procedures in place, we have the role and responsibility set up, ecosystem is there, and now we will be able to scale it up. The same way it will happen in agriculture also, because agriculture has been an ignored sector for a long time. And there are basic fundamental issues about agriculture, fundamental issues about the supply chain, fundamental issues about the linkage of the agriculture produce to the markets. So it will take significant time in changing it. Yes, effort has already been started, but for now we also need employment. We have a lot of population, young population, which needs employment. And for that, we have to simultaneously invite investment. And for investment, the only source which is easily available is the foreign direct investment and the other financial institutions. We have to accept this fact. And that is why I'm saying that we have to take both of them together, because if we just focus only on the laggard sectors, we will not be able to provide employment to our population. That is my personal view.
Anyway, Professor,
Thank you, sir.
it is a debatable issue. It is a debatable issue.
Yes, we will talk about it later also. But thank you very much.
Not a single issue as such, Dr. Pushpa. I think long-term solutions have to be there, and from both short-term, long-term, we go with the strategy, the choice variables. Until temporarily, we'll be able to generate employment.
Yeah, definitely. I agree that we have to go for long term, and we are not denying that we should not go for privatization. Only our apprehension is privatization, yes. But as Dr. Bajaj said, FDI is the only way. If FDI is the only way, then you create equally, forcefully the skillful labor, demographic dividend we have to create the skilled labor that will take up the jobs in FDI investments. That's the thing. Because even in rural areas, now the offsprings of the farmers are not interested in going for agriculture because they feel that it is highly risky, no returns. So everybody wants white collar jobs. And fortunately or unfortunately, in Indian system, higher education, everybody feels it is mandatory. Unlike in Western countries where higher education is not mandatory for everybody. So only those who aspire will go. But here we give higher education to everybody and we create expectations among them for white collar jobs. From where are you going to give? Without, it is a product without proper finishing, you know. Even after post-graduation, they find it so difficult to express themselves in their own mother tongue also, as well as in other English, and subject knowledge. So so many issues are haunting us. So we need to address all that. Only government cannot do, I agree. And neither I am against any kind of reforms or foreign investment. Yes, we do need. This issue we have to address on a top priority if we have to capitalize on demographic dividend on which we boast a lot. That's just a concern. As I said, it is debatable anyway.
I'm in full agreement with what you said, Professor Pushpa.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, Pushpa ma'am, I agree for Bajaj sir and Pushpa ma'am. I agree for that. I'm from the rural area and we have agriculture. I agree for that. Nowadays, everyone, they are trying to get the higher education. After getting higher education, they don't try to come back to their farm or rural place. They try to go only the companies. Because if we ask why you are not coming and working in the agriculture sector, it is also you can make as a business. But they tell that, no, it is very highly risky. So we don't get any income from that. If they are as large farmers also, they don't want to their kids to put into agriculture. Because it is very highly risky, and even farmers, they are not interested to out of the new technologies like a e-farm is there, and even technology, only large farmers they are adopting, but only for the short period. They don't want to go again further to improve their agriculture. So I think in in India, if agriculture is a backbone, we have to encourage as our youth, like sir told, like 3L and 3Ws. I feel I want to introduce 3Es, like empowering employment and encourage to the youth towards to the agriculture. Then only the employability can be increased, and our agriculture, the income can be contribute more for the GDP, because in our blood we have an agriculture system. Why not improve that as a first? Then we can look into the other aspects, whatever requirement for the economy. That I feel it's my suggestion. Sir, you can add, or ma'am, you can add further for that.
Yeah, well received.
Dr. Patti sir can proceed further.
Okay, can I wrap the session, madam?
Yeah, if there are no
Okay. Yeah. I wish to express sincere gratitude to both the experts. I wish to express gratitude to Professor S.K. Loria on behalf of organizers as well as on behalf of participants. Professor Loria sir explained the whole gamut of Atmanirbhar Bharat. He dealt with the developments in various sectors to make Atmanirbhar Bharat. Various challenges and opportunities were dealt. Loria sir, we are thankful to you once again for enlightening us on the event. We will be seeking your support in our further endeavors. With equal relevance, I wish to express my sincere gratitude to C.A. Naval Kishore Bajaj sir to express his thoughts and share his expertise. C.A. Bajaj sir has given us various statistics to understand the status of India's preparedness to become Atmanirbhar. C.A. Naval sir has shared his practical experience with us and highlighted various challenges ahead for Atmanirbhar Bharat. He also suggested for few policy reforms. Sir, once again, we thank you for enlightening us on the given topic. I thank both the experts. Sir, we'll seek similar academic association and support from your side. We are also grateful to the guests of honor of the day, Professor M.B. Alagwadi sir and Professor Pushpa M. Savdatti madam, for their wholehearted support and guidance. I thank all the participants for your active participation in the session. We had a very fruitful interaction and the session was quite useful. Thanks are due to organizing secretaries Dr. Lingamurthy and Dr. Basraj. We are thankful to the competent authorities of CUK for the administrative support. Thank you one and all. Have a great day and wonderful weekend. Thank you very much. Thank you one and all.
So I take pleasure in thank you profusely our eminent speakers. A wonderful speech, and it is very encouraging for the students. The message to take home today from our eminent speakers is, don't look for what government is doing for you. The government is already doing whatever it is supposed to do. The young students of this country should ask what I can do now. You have a lot of opportunities compared to when we were those days, 1970s, 80s. What is required is motivation, courage, dynamism, creativity. If you have that, whatever field you choose, you will excel. That kind of an environment has been already created, and the government is also further creating. So you have to come forward and make best use of the available environment, facilities and resources. So then only we can boast about demographic dividend, right? So don't ask, it is not there, this is not there. Everything is there. It is for you, how you take it. That is the take-home message from our eminent speakers. And I thank profusely for a wonderful igniting speech from both Professor Loria and Professor Bajaj. And our department and our university will look forward for continued interaction, because we belong to School of Business Studies, where we have commerce, management and economics. So thank you. And thank you to Dr. Lingamurthy, Basavaraj and all faculty and students for making this session a very vibrant and successful one. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. There is a small announcement. Before announcement, I would like to thank both the speakers because they accepted over phone with a limited time only. So for that, I am very kindful to them for accepting, and I hope we'll keep in touch academical sense. So Day after tomorrow, we have a webinar series valedictory program at 4 o'clock, and speakers will be Raman Magsaysay awardee Harish Honde and Delhi School of Economics Professor Surendra Kumar. I hope everybody will participate again, and we will meet Monday at 4 o'clock. Thank you and all.
Thank you.